Thank you very much for the presentation, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. The topic of my talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Alinea?
Okay. So the topic of my talk is novel, natural, invisible carriers for nutraceuticals. As you know, and has been discussed in various other lectures here, the world is facing various non-communicable diseases like obesity, the whole metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and so on, and also, of course, cancer. And there's great need to do whatever we can to prevent those diseases. And one of the main things we can do, and the interest of this conference, of course, is what we can do in terms of the food that we eat. And so our motivation in my lab, and as in some of yours also, is to produce or develop various health-promoting foods which can prevent various diseases. In particular, our approach is to try to modify existing foods which people are already eating and to make them more health-promoting rather than to try to radically change eating habits. This will take longer time, but we would like to make the foods that we do eat more healthy in the shorter or intermediate range. So we want to protect and to enrich foods with nutraceuticals, and to do that we need to protect those sensitive compounds, and we want to enable enriching foods with those compounds. Some of these compounds are difficult to add to foods, and of course you know there are various nutraceutical compounds. Some of them are water-soluble, some of them are oil-soluble, and each one of them has its own properties and challenges. In particularly, many of the studies we've been working on with my lab are focusing on vitamin D as a model because it's a very, very important bioactive compound. Maybe it shouldn't be called a vitamin because our body can't produce it by itself, but it doesn't produce enough because most of us are not exposed enough to the sun. We are working indoors most of the time, and when we do go out to the sun, we put sunscreen to prevent the risk or to reduce risk of melanoma, and then we don't produce enough vitamin D. So a large proportion, maybe 75% of the population, even in Israel, which is a relatively sunny country, is deficient or insufficient in vitamin D, which is surprising. I don't know how many of you have done your blood test to see how much vitamin D you have. If you haven't, I strongly recommend you do that. Most of us are deficient or insufficient because there's hardly any vitamin D in the foods that we eat, and it's a great need to enrich foods in significant amounts of vitamin D. So if we want to add hydrophobic molecules into clear beverages and beverages which we consume a lot of, so we get enough sufficient enrichment, there are many challenges. First of all, some of those compounds are water insoluble. When we do add them, either they phase separate or they cause turbidity. Some of them have off flavors. Some of them are sensitive to various degradation processes during production, during shelf life, even during digestion. And of course, we want to protect them, but not protect them too much so that they are not bioavailable. We want them still to be absorbed by the body and to do what we expect them to do. We would like to do that using only natural food ingredients, not all the synthetic surfactants that are usually used for those purposes, because the consumers would like natural labeling, they like user-friendly labeling, and we want to do all those things but keep the costs low so it's a viable technology for the producers to take. So I'll show you briefly several of the projects we've been doing in my lab over the last few years which tackle this problem from different perspectives, different directions, different approaches. First one of them is using beta-lactoglobulin. It's the whey protein. It's a natural vehicle. At least it comes from a family of proteins which have this structure which enables them to carry small hydrophobic molecules because they have this hydrophobic pocket which can bind hydrophobic molecules. And so this is very useful for us. And it can also bind in different locations. Another material we used in this project is pectin, also another natural component which comes from fruit, from citrus or apple. And the idea is to use natural electrostatic interactions since the pectin is negatively charged, particularly at higher pHs, and the protein is positively charged below its isoelectric pH, which is around 5 in this case. There is this range where they have optimal attraction, and we want to apply that to create nanoparticles with these. So basically, you can look at this figure here and see that in all of these vials, they're the same concentration of beta-lactoglobulin, okay? And then we started adding pectin, increased concentration of pectin gradually, and you see because they have opposite charges, they coacervate and they precipitate. And the more pectin we put, the more precipitation we form, until a certain point. You see this point here? Suddenly we go beyond that point and we get a colloidally stable system, and this one is even completely clear. So what is happening is actually that initially we start with positively charged protein below the isoelectric pH, and we start adding pectin, we get charge neutralization, and we get zeta potential close to zero. This precipitation this is what causes the precipitation. But if we keep adding pectin, and eventually we have excess of pectin, and we have negatively charged nanoparticles which are colloidally stable, and that's what we wanted to achieve. So this is the turbidity. You can see turbidity increases, but then it goes down again. And this is like a model we propose for what happens. This is just the protein. Those are the neutral complexes which precipitate, coacervate, and precipitate. And at excess of pectin, we have those nanoparticles with excess of pectin, which are colloidally stable. Then we took a bioactive compound, for example, DHA, docosahexaenoic acid from fish oil, and it binds to the beta-lactoglobulin. We've seen the binding. This is by fluorescence. You see nice binding constant, 10 to the power of 5. And if you put it with the protein, it already precipitates. It's not stable. But when we add pectin, we reach this region where we have negative zeta potential, and we have colloidally stable system. What is even nicer is that we get protection by doing that, and this is the unprotected DHA. It degrades very quickly under, this is with time, at 40 degrees C stress conditions. It degrades quickly. This is with the protein only, and this is with the protein and the pectin after 100 hours, only 10% loss. Another project here, we tried to tackle a water-soluble compound, EGCG from green tea, very important nutraceutical compound. A cup of tea has about 90 milligrams of that, and many studies have shown various health effects in terms of cardiovascular diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and so on. And we want to protect that compound because it is, first of all, it's very sensitive to degradation, and it's very bitter and astringent, so we also have to control its sensory attributes. So here you can see that when you just put it in neutral pH, it oxidizes and polymerizes and forms a yellow color, which we can track with time. So this is what we want to prevent, and we introduce this process where we take the EGCG in acidic conditions. It's relatively stable. We take the protein, beta-lactoglobulin in this case, again, and we heat it. We denature it, and by that we improve the binding of the protein and the EGCG. We mix them together, and we form nanoparticles. And as you can see, this is just the protein on the left here, the peak on the left, that's just the protein. And when we start increasing the EGCG, we get slightly larger nanoparticles, but they are all below about 30 or 40 nanometers. So we get a completely clear system with the protein. What is more interesting is that with time, you see, this is unprotected EGCG. It forms this brownish color with time as it oxidizes. This is with the native protein, some protection, and with the heat denatured protein, much, much better protection. You see, with the protection and without the protection. Also, in terms of sensory, we've sent the samples to an objective taste panel of a company, and they did the testing, and you can see that bitterness is considerably suppressed by the encapsulation. This is with the encapsulation and without the encapsulation. Also, astringency, you see it's considerably suppressed. A third project, we took a different approach. We wanted to form conjugates of a protein and a polysaccharides, but we wanted to form covalent conjugates but use a chemical reaction which would still be considered natural and not synthetic. So the idea is to take the Maillard reaction, the Maillard-Browning reaction, which is common in foods and food cooking, and to take that for our advantage. So if you take a protein and a polysaccharide, you heat them together, and they form this Maillard reaction conjugation, and we get a block of polymer which can now self-assemble spontaneously in solution. And if we add a hydrophobic compound, it would spontaneously be entrapped in the core, and we have a nice double layer nano-coating for the compound, which would solubilize it. And this is the Maillard reaction. I'm sure most of you know it. It's a reaction between amine groups of proteins and aldehyde group of a saccharide. And this is what causes the browning of bread or toast. And we took casein as our protein and maltodextrin as our saccharide part. The nice thing about maltodextrin is that it only has one reducing end group, one aldehyde per molecule. So each of these oligosaccharide would only bind to one peptide, one protein. The other thing we wanted to achieve is the increased curvature effect. And the idea is that you can say, why do I need to add this maltodextrin on? The casein is already an amphiphilic protein. It can also already form emulsions, and it's self-assembles and so on. But the thing is, the hydrophobic and the hydrophilic parts of casein are about the same size. So the packing parameter is relatively high, and the curvature is low. So if we take now the maltodextrin and we bind it, conjugate to the hydrophilic part of the protein, we make it bulkier. And when it's bulkier, it forms lower packing parameter, and we form higher curvature, and we get both smaller particles and a double layer coating, which, if you think about it, it's not that trivial. So here is the heating process. We checked with the SDS page. This is just the protein. And this is the protein and maltodextrin, which were separately heated and then mixed. Of course, in this staining, you only see the protein, but these are just two ratios. And in these 4 bands, 1 to 4, the protein and maltodextrin were first mixed and then heated together. And you can see that there is an upward shift in molecular weight of about 5 kilodaltons. Now, the maltodextrin was about 1 kilodalton, so we have approximately, on average, 5 maltodextrin bound to each protein molecule. When we put this, dissolve it in different pHs, you see we get nice nanoparticles smaller than 20 or 30 nanometer. Now we used vitamin D as our model hydrophobic compound, and as you see, we increase the ratio of vitamin D. On the left, those are the conjugates. On the right, that's the mixture, the unconjugated protein and maltodextrin. And with the conjugates, you see that up to 8 to 1 vitamin D to casein ratio, molar ratio, above 80% of the nanoparticles are smaller than 100 nanometers. While in the mixture, already above a 1-to-1 ratio, we start getting large particles, large aggregates of the vitamin. So this shows that the increased curvature effect works. You can maybe see it visually more convincingly. This is just the conjugates in water. You see that we managed to do the Maillard reaction under very controlled conditions before it starts getting browning. So this is not brown, as you see. And in the right 2 vials, both of them have the exact same concentration of vitamin D. This one is just in buffer, and this one is with the conjugates, and you see the clarification effect of the conjugates. What is even nicer, if you put it under condition of low pH for 2 hours, like what happens in the stomach, most of the unprotected vitamin degrades, 70% lost. If you put it with a mixture of protein and maltodextrin, there is some protection. With the conjugate, we have 90% protection. Also during shelf life, you see great loss without any protection, some protection with the protein, separate protein and maltodextrin, and with the conjugate after 2 weeks, practically no loss. Another project we used we wanted to use plant-based proteins because for some application you cannot use milk proteins. Here we try to use soy protein, and we use beta-conglycinin, this protein from soy. Again, we put in a solution of beta-conglycinin, we add some vitamin D. And as you can see, this is with the protein, and this is without the protein. You see that protein forms small particles which solubilize and help keep the system completely clear. Also, this is turbidity and the particle size. This is just the vitamin. On the right, you see it forms large particles. Thank you. And on the left, with and without the vitamin, pretty much the same size distribution. Also under microscope, and protection during shelf life, and so on. Also during simulated digestion, with the low is without protection, the red, and the blue is with the protection of the beta-conglycinin. The fifth project, here we wanted to use a different protein which comes from fungi. It's called hydrophobin. Hydrophobin is a very amphiphilic protein, small, about 9 kilodaltons. It is used in fungi to build the wall, the structure of the external structure of the fungi, and some is exerted into the medium. And if we take it in an isolated form, it self-assembles. Here you can see the self-assembly. We managed to determine the critical micelle concentration. And we've checked with 2 different hydrophobic compounds, vitamin D and Nile red. We can see very nice binding of the hydrophobic compounds. And also in terms of particle size, this is vitamin D. The red and the yellow are just the vitamin D in water, forms large particles. With the protein, it forms very small nanoparticles. You can see it visually again, with the protein clear, without the protein turbid. And it forms very nice. If you look under a cryo-TM microscope, you see very nice flat surfaces which have like a bulge at the end. So it's like, when it forms a sandwich layer between the 2 hydrophobins because they have this flat surface on one side. So they attach to the vitamin and sandwich between 2 layers of the protein. And at the end, it's like when you fold a carpet, it forms like a little bulge at the end. It also protects the vitamin during shelf life, and that's like the whole project in one slide. And briefly, the last couple of projects, we wanted to use a protein which is both vegetable source protein from a cheap source and which is not considered allergenic, because at least soy proteins are considered allergenic. So we found this very interesting protein from potatoes. Potatoes have soluble proteins in them, and they can be used for that. So this is the main protein in potato. It's called patatin. You see the structure of it. It has hydrophobic and hydrophilic segments, and this shows binding, again, using vitamin D as a model. Nice binding. The difference between the 2 curves shows that there is binding, at least qualitatively. And again, you see the turbidity test with the protein, without the protein, particle size, protein alone, the vitamin alone, and in the middle is the combined, and particle size distribution. And this is in beverages, for example. This is lemon lime soda, completely clear with the vitamin encapsulated with the protein. Also thermal protection. Vitamin D alone degrades under the heat treatment, and with the potato protein, it is much significantly protected. Also during shelf life, under acid conditions, and this is under 4 degrees C without light. You see with the protection of the protein, no loss. Without the protein, it degrades quickly. And this is omega-3 colored with Nile red, and you see that without the protein, it's floating on the surface, and with the protein, it's nicely dispersed. Maybe I'll skip the last project with sugar beet pectin, doing the same effect, but this time with curcumin. I just summarize that with these technologies, we can bind hydrophobic in water-insoluble compounds and disperse them and protect them in clear beverages. And we can minimize off flavors, enhance bioavailability. I haven't shown you results, but we have some interesting results on bioavailability. We can extend shelf life, and we do it using kosher parve. In some cases, we use vegetarian or for vegan consumers, and non-allergenic plant-based proteins, as in the case of the potato protein or the pectin. And this is my team, to which I owe this work, which you've seen. And thank you for your attention. I'd be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. Any question, please? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for really interesting and exciting presentation. Did you measure the changes in biological activity of your products after the binding to nanoparticles?
Good question. No, we haven't. We have tested bioavailability. If we take vitamin D, for example, I haven't seen it here. I haven't shown it here, sorry. But we have made 3 clinical trials already with a technology which is based on casein micelles, where we entrap the vitamin D within the casein micelles, and we let people drink it, either in a milk or a yogurt product. And then we check the vitamin, the derivative of vitamin D, which is called 25-OHD. That's the bioconversion derivative. And we've seen that when it's encapsulated within casein micelles, the conversion is the same as when it arrives in fat, for example, or in a synthetic surfactant like Twin 80. We get very high bioavailability, and the same bioconversion. We get the same final product, final molecule in the blood, which is the status indicator of vitamin D level in the blood. Of course, this has to be done for different materials as well, but just the encapsulation, usually it's only using physical interactions, only hydrophobic interactions, and we only protect the molecule from degrading, so there is no, and it breaks down, the proteins break down during digestion, and the materials are released and absorbed. Sometimes the peptides even facilitate better absorption of the bioactives. So I don't suspect that there would be any decrease in the bioactivity. We even have recently done some tests in rats with the project I've shown you with the EGCG, with the beta-lactoglobulin, and we've shown that the area under the curve in the blood of the rats was higher, significantly higher, when it was encapsulated in the beta-lactoglobulin than when the EGCG was given in a free form. So I hope that answers.
Additional questions? Okay. The last presentations.